Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show today. We have Gabrielle Mellon with us. Gabrielle is currently in the role of SVP of Talent Acquisition and HR Operations at Axon. Gabrielle, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Looking forward to today's conversation, and it's already been great getting to know you on our prep call, and then before we hit record today. So yeah, let's jump into it. Where are you from?
Originally, I am from a very small little town in the Pacific Northwest called Yakima, Washington. I know you and I were kind of making some jokes earlier today. Palm Springs of Washington is affectionately known kind of in a small circle of human beings here in Washington.
Nice. And I think you said it was a pretty small town. That
Yeah,
right?
when I was growing up, it was my husband and I have arguments about this, by the way. So he
Okay.
grew up in what he feels is a very small town of he grew up in Oregon, so he was like, my small town was under 10,000, and at the time I was growing up, Yakima was around 30,000. So he
Uh,
believes that doesn't
so
count.
he thinks he's got
Um,
you beat.
yes, yes, but I'm totaling like the outer areas
Uh,
of the
so it
city.
depends how you
Yeah,
measure it.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. But
You got to find out how to like make the data work in your favor there. Just
I definitely like making the data work in my favor. So, but no, I mean it was super cool growing up there. I had the opportunity to have a really high degree of independence. My parents, had my curfew and was very safe and everything like that. But my parents knew all of the other parents. They,
Mm.
somehow or another, our families were connected in some way, shape, or form. So I got to, drive around and be with my friends a lot and go out and into the community, lots of sports. And I think because of that, it, being, out and about from an early age, it really did develop a really strong sense of personal independence.
Mm.
And I do think that that's rooted from that small town kind of feel.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you
Yeah.
also had a pretty big family, right?
I have a huge family. Yeah. My mom's one of seven. Her mother is one of 13. And then on my dad's side, it's like another five and another seven, another whatnot. So yeah, we have a ton of like really fun traditions. We've got cousin camp out, we've got family Olympics, and then we've got giant Christmas Eves and Thanksgivings. And so, growing up, I didn't understand until I was about 8 years old that Thanksgivings were not happening in a hall situation with about 10 turkeys and tables and tables and tables of food. I thought that was everybody's norm. And so when, one of the little girls in my class asked me, like, whose house am I going to? I thought she was just crazy. Like, how are you going to fit all of the people for
Right. How
Thanksgiving
are
in a
hundreds
house?
of people going to get in a
Yeah.
house? Like, how does that?
Yeah. We averaged about 125 people for Thanksgiving. So,
That
and that
is
that was
wild.
normal. My husband, he came to Thanksgiving. He was a very brave human being. The first year we dated, he came to a Thanksgiving and he thought I was crazy. He's like, "No, there's no way that you know these people. You cannot stand here and say that you know two facts about every single person in this room." And I was like, "Yep."
That's impressive. Yeah, and I gotta ask, you said your family does family Olympics.
Yep.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm curious, like how competitive and intense does it get?
Very. So
Yeah.
that happens during cousin camp out. Every family, and you have to bring a different game every single year. So it
Hmm.
becomes very creative, and you
Really? So
and
you don't have like
oh
repeat consistency
no,
to
you can't be
really?
repeat, James. That like no,
Oh,
no. This is
well,
like
that would seem
family
kind of fun though,
pride.
because if you get in second one year, you have like the opportunity to come back and place gold. No?
Yeah, well, and this, probably, I'll be appropriate, but the gold prize is I believe, what was it? It was a Miller Lite, gold, like what's the gold can beer?
I'm not
I
sure.
don't even
I'm
remember,
not sure.
but
It's
yeah,
like
my
it's like
auntie
a
would hang.
Miller, like one of those, like some
Yeah, and then the silver Bud Light was the silver place, but can around for the Family Olympic like
Miller
prizes.
Lite Gold. I think it's just
Maybe
called.
that was it. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. I love this.
So everybody was competing for the gold beer. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I mean there was a lot of family pride on not bringing repeats, and the way that it actually worked out is there were usually three generations that come to this, and so there was the grandparents and my grandparents, my mother's generation, and then my generation, and so My mother's generation was the biggest because of how big everybody was. And so my generation would get paired up with the grandparents' generation, and then we would compete against the middle generation. And so it got
Mm,
very competitive.
that is
So
awesome.
I learned from an early age to just, hook up with my grandparents and just get after my mom and dad.
Yeah, that sounds like so many good memories.
Yeah.
Do any games stand out?
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have seen it before. It's, the grapefruit down the pantyhose.
No.
Oh
It
gosh.
actually sounds
Come
so okay, so tell
on.
me more about this.
Okay, so you take a pair of pantyhose, you put a grapefruit in one leg,
Uh-huh.
and you take the other leg and you tie it around your waist, and the leg hangs
Okay, yeah, I
between
don't
your
know what this
legs.
game is.
Okay, so you take a second grapefruit and you put it on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe like 3 feet, you draw a line in the dirt, and then two teams stand next to one another, and you swing like a pendulum the grapefruit hanging from your waist, and you knock the other grapefruit from one line over to the next line, and
Wow.
whoever can do that the fastest gets the gold beer.
Wow. That's super yeah, that's creative. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
I don't know.
I love it.
There's a lot of shenanigans.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Maybe it also taught me to be very creative and problem solve at
Right,
a
right.
really early
It's like the
age.
number one contributing factor to like creative leadership is like swinging the grapefruit.
I
It's
guess,
pretty funny. There's
like
a lesson in
I
there. There's a lesson in there
there
if you look
is,
hard enough.
there is, yeah.
So you also like you were into a lot of sports growing up too, right? You were quite the athlete.
I played year-round sports
Yeah,
growing up. So from the time that I was willing and able. I don't think, and if my mother was standing right here, she'd say this right now. Like my mom was not a very athletic. My dad's the athlete parent, and so when I got to the age of being able, so it was about sixth grade, I was in
mm,
every single sport I could possibly be in. So it was, soccer, softball, track, cross country, and anything and everything. But I got really, really good at softball.
softball.
And it was more so because I was pretty fearless. I was not afraid of laying out and using my body to stop the ball. And it's like I had pretty good eye coordination where I could track it, and so my spots were center field and shortstop, and so I could track a ball coming really, really, really easily into center field. And if I'm not very tall, I'm like 5'4", so if I knew I wasn't gonna get it, and I'm pretty quick, I could leap and lay
Yeah.
out, and honestly, like most of the times I could actually catch it. So
Nice.
that was usually that was kind of like the standout thing, is I could track the ball pretty well. And I get really, really upset when it would get by me. So yeah,
Mm,
they very rarely got by me.
yeah. So you were pretty competitive from the
I'm
start.
very competitive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
very.
Did you end up playing sports in college or
Well, I did a little bit of softball, and then
yeah?
realized that you know, not much comes after that for women.
Sure,
And
yeah.
so it was one of those things where I had a couple opportunities, even when I was making choices about where to go to school.
Mm,
Um, I had some different scholarship opportunities, and it was truly one of those things where I knew I wasn't good enough to play in the Olympics. That was really the only other thing that came for women after ball or after
mm,
college ball. And I was very professionally ambitious and minded, and I knew I didn't want to spend 5 or 6 years in college. And so I was like, well, I got to be practical here. And I was paying for school myself, so it was one of those
mm.
things like I don't want to be here forever. I gotta buckle down and go. So
Yeah, well, you said that like you kind of culture, like community and family
yeah,
was like it sounds like big emphasis on hard work. Almost like personal accountability or taking charge was like sort of a takeaway from the I don't know if you'd phrase it like that, but what you were saying in terms of you were making pretty big decisions early on. And a lot of it was like self-guided, right? Like when you by the time
yeah,
you were deciding decisions like around college and whatnot. Is that right? Or
yeah. My I think again, kind of like we were, growing up in that small town, like it's an agricultural based city, and so my
Mm,
grandparents were in refineries and canneries, orchards. My grandfather was a mechanic. My mom, she was in accounts payables and billings for a medical clinic. My father, was in lumber and construction. Everybody just worked really hard, like really, really, really hard.
yeah.
And so when I was little, college was never a choice. My parents were always like, you are going to school, like that, like college, like you are, that is happening. Um, but outside of it is happening, because I think the family weren't necessarily used to making kind of decisions about college, or and this was well before the time with paper brochures were still coming in the mail telling you about schools, right? Like you weren't given the opportunity to do the research on, like, well, what kind of degrees can you get, or what does that set you up for the future when you graduate, what professional line can you go in after this, or and this was before you were taking tests that my kids take now of, oh well, your personality suits you to do X, Y, and Z in a profession. And so I think outside of instilling, you are going to do this, I was kind of left to my own devices to figure out what and how. And so I started applying to schools, and I got into the schools, and then I narrowed it down to two. And one was Boston College and one was the University of Washington.
The good schools.
Two different schools, East Coast, West
Hmm.
Coast, right? And I kind of had my heart set on Boston College. It was an adventure. It was East Coast, and again, very different kind of day and time at that, then, like, you didn't do college visits. You were making a decision based off of what very little website there was at the time and the brochures that you had. And for me, it was also, I was making a financial decision. I was the one that was putting myself through school. I was the one that was kind of thinking about, how am I going to do this? And my mom, she kind of took me aside as I was making that final decision, and she said, it's a long way away. UW, it's 2.5 hours away. She's like, that first time that you get sick, I think you're really going to be disappointed that you're on the East Coast. And you just talked. I have a really, really tight knit family. She's like, you're not going to be able to fly home for Thanksgiving. You're not going to, like, you'll probably be able to come home once a year.
Mm.
She's like, we're not going to see you. She's like, you really need to think about that. She's like, you need to make this decision, but you really need to think about the family element of it. And in hindsight, I remember being kind of upset with her that she
Mm.
that she did that. And at the same time, she wasn't wrong. I'm extremely close with my family. I'm extremely close with my parents, and I remember begrudgingly deciding to go to UW, and it was far less expensive. It was much, much closer. And the interesting thing is, we're talking about the why intersection of that decision. Um, by making that decision, by going to the University of Washington, I just met this incredible circle of human beings that shaped my adult life, and ultimately met my husband my senior year of college. And I have my three incredible teenage children now as a byproduct of that. And I think about that one single choice.
Hmm.
If I had gone to the East Coast, I wouldn't have the family I have now. I wouldn't have the career I have now. I wouldn't
Yeah.
have the incredible people in my life that I have right now. And so I honestly have to think, well, my mom knew something. I clearly did not at that moment in time.
I hear you. I hear you. And
Yeah,
you ended up studying, it was like political communication, is that right?
I did.
That's
Yeah,
cool. So
yeah.
that's like a little different than, I guess, political science, right? Maybe there's some crossover there. So what were the examples of some of the classes for political communication? I mean, that was
Um,
just kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. So poli sci were some of the classes, but comms, right? So some of it was like, again, government classes, and then the main communication classes. I loved the communication classes. So I had some of the best communication professors. One of them actually sponsored me for an internship down in Los Angeles,
Mm.
working at Warner Brothers. Um, Crispin Thurlow. How did I actually still remember his name? He was just such an incredible professor, and he was my senior year communication advisor. Um, and he just really had such a strong impact on. And it's funny actually just thinking about that. One person can have such a fun impact on your the way you think about things. Anyway, so no, so the reason I went into political communication is I actually thought I wanted to run campaigns. I was really fascinated with politics at the time, and when I was a freshman in college, I got involved with student government. I ended up working on Al Gore's presidential campaign. he lost. So 4 years later, actually it was 2.5, 3 years later when the next campaign started back up. I actually intentionally worked for George W. Bush's campaign because I wanted to actually have the experience of a red campaign and a blue campaign and actually understand and
That's
cross compare.
awesome. Yeah, yeah, that's really
Um,
cool.
and in Washington, being a blue state, seeing how a red campaign is run was really,
So
really,
what?
really fascinating.
Let's hear about that. So what was it like? That must have been like a really fascinating experience. That's pretty cool.
Well, so they didn't want to spend any money in a blue state, right? And
Oh, okay,
so
yeah,
I think the mental mindset was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna lose it. So why do I want to spend like really important campaign dollars? Well, the interesting thing that I was actually just saying about growing up in the Palm Springs of Washington in an agriculture side, Washington's kind of like really pretty split politically when you think about it. The Seattle side is very blue, and the Eastern Washington side is actually pretty red. And so, actually being able to chat with the campaign team and be able to advocate for even some of my family members and say, hey, like no, like there's still a lot of human being, and it wasn't just my voice, by the way. That don't want to package it that way, but being able to kind of talk from the younger kind of voter perspective that hey, like there are on the eastern side of it a lot of red voters, and I don't think it's the right thing to just write it off. That so he actually George W. Bush actually did come to the state. He did do some different campaigning events, but they were all tailored on the eastern side of the state, which is the
Hmm.
right thing to do. So what I learned about that though was it wasn't necessarily about candidly what they were saying or what they were campaigning on. It was actually about the strategy of running that campaign as a business. And so, how are we going to talk about what the candidate is saying? Where are they going to go and why? And it almost became kind of like the chessboard equation. So I learned more about the strategy than more about the politics, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
really cool.
So but I also learned I did not want to go into politics, and I did not really enjoy working on political campaigns.
Well, so okay, I'm just like really super curious about this. Like when it came down to the strategy, you said it's less about the topics. You said it's more about uh where they're going. And can you explain more? That would just it's interesting. I'd love to learn more about that.
Uh, it comes down to where they're going to go to fundraise.
To fundraise. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
So,
really about
uh,
fundraising versus like swaying voters one way or another, or does just your
well,
presence like sway voters, just like being
you're
there?
yeah, being there, what you say when you're there, combined with the fundraising side of it, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the hey, we need to get him in this place at this time. He needs to say these two things, and we need to make this fundraising ask.
Hmm.
So,
It's like combining both of those things with each every place
yeah,
you visit.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, like I said, it wasn't the first time, and in candor, like it wasn't it was actually the first time, but it hasn't been the last time in my in a professional environment where maybe I was a little disillusioned,
Hmm.
um, where I genuinely thought it was going to be about the issues and the topics and what was mattering in the community and mattering to the voters, and it was, but a really small slice of it.
Right.
Um, and again, like I still learned so very much about, and again, I was probably far too naive in hindsight about all of the different moving pieces associated with that. That of course it was only a slice of that pie, but when you're 18 and 20 years old, you really glean into that one little slice.
Right.
Now as a much older human, like you see the bigger portion of that. Um, but it was the first time really, really head on being disillusioned with something.
Yeah, for sure. And so that was so you did that for two campaigns, which is really cool. And then
Mhm.
at that point, that was shortly after you ended up going to work at Microsoft, right? Was that the next or
Yeah. Well, so I went from, well, when I I worked on the campaigns as from an internship perspective. Went to Los Angeles, worked with Warner Brothers for a while, and then when I came back to do my senior year, I wasn't actually planning to stay in Seattle. And like I said, I met my husband,
Hmm.
and he is a business owner, and so I wasn't intending to stay in Seattle. So I was going to graduate and go off to my next adventure. And with him and his, job and career, he wasn't that was not in the cards for me.
Mm.
So, when you fall in love and like, okay, well, like, I'm gonna see where this goes. I ended up I'm really dating myself now. I put my resume on monsters.com, and 3 days later, I had a job at Microsoft.
Nice, nice, yeah. And you said one of your initial like managers at Microsoft was pretty influential, right? In terms of like your development and foundation for business.
Yeah. So
Or
he wasn't
was that
necessarily.
Microsoft? That was
It was
Microsoft, right?
Microsoft. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Yes, he was very influential. He was my initial manager as a people leader. So that was many years later.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to be at Microsoft for about a decade. And so he became my manager about 5 years in,
Mm,
and incredibly influential. To this day, he's still my mentor.
that's awesome. What are like some of the top things you learned from him?
Mm. Well, Um, he's a really like humble human, good sense of humor, and admits when he gets it wrong. And I never let him forget that he got it wrong with me. And so
Never let him forget.
never let him forget.
Nice.
Never let him forget. So, I mean, and I appreciate that we can still like we joke and we've got humor, and I can tease him and he can tease me. We've always been able to joke like that. But I remember I was coming back from maternity leave with my second child, and there was a manager job open, and the leadership team had asked me if I would interview for it. So I did, and I didn't get the job. And
Mhm.
interestingly, when I was interviewing, his name is Chuck. When I was interviewing a Chuck, one of the questions he asked me was, "What are 3 reasons why you shouldn't get this job?"
Mm.
I gave my 3 reasons. And then, a few days later, he no hired me, citing those 3 reasons, which I thought was like terrible. I was like, be more original, be more original. So I was like, okay, fine. It was like, I like my job, so I don't really care. Like, I'm coming back from maternity leave. I've got 2 kids that I'm juggling. Like, no
Hmm.
worries. So 3 months later, it was a Friday afternoon. I'm sitting, and he calls my cell phone, and I was like, why is Chuck calling my cell phone? And he was like, Gabrielle, I got it wrong. Like, what? He was like, I should never have no hired you. He's like, would you ever consider taking this manager job? And I remember being silent and quiet. And he was like, hello, Gabrielle, are you there? I was like, no, I'm here. Just I was just processing. And he was like, well, what do you think? And my first question is like, are you desperate? I was like, oh my gosh. He's like, no. I was like, well, the job's been open for 3 months. Like, do you just need somebody to fill the job? Like, is that why you're coming back and saying that? He's like, no. He's like, I have literally compared every single candidate to you. And he's like, and I can admit when I get it wrong, and I got it wrong, and I'd really like you to take the job. And I just remember like, well, I'm gonna take the weekend and think about it. And he was like, okay. So then on Monday morning, I walked into his office and I was like, okay, I'm gonna take it. He was like, oh my gosh. He's like, I was like worried all weekend. And it was kind of the beginning of a really good and like almost like teasingly uh open and direct relationship. And I'm truly grateful that I, from day number one, could be as honest and straight with him. And it has never changed since then.
I love it. And I think this is like, was this around the time, like around like midway through your career at Microsoft, you started thinking about transitioning from the fixer to architect mindset, or was that later on? I can't remember exactly.
No,
When was that?
I would actually, yeah, no, I would say that's kind of throughout, right? So, Microsoft was a really interesting kind of time in my career.
Hmm.
So I would say, having been there for, 10 years, I would say literally every 18 months, I would get moved into a new job.
Okay.
And you know, sometimes it was by choice and sometimes it wasn't. And essentially, I would hop into the most disgusting, chaotic, messy thing, and organize it. And I think I got a little bit of, in a good way, I got a reputation for cleaning things and making messy situations hum and move really, really easily. And then as soon as I did that, they would put somebody to do that job and then put me into the next messy situation. And so I think because I got known as that fixer and I was always willing to just hop in and do that, it didn't, it was like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. So in that 10 years, it felt like I had like 6 different jobs. I'm really
Right.
actually very grateful for that. But I think while I was doing all of that fixing, what I was making the comment was like, I was actually learning, I was learning construction that now where I'm at in my career today, I think that I'm actually more in this architecture phase that I actually wouldn't be very good at had I not been in that construction phase in my
Right.
career. But I do think in 2020 hindsight, you know, I wish I had had more of an active voice in maybe understanding some of the why. I'm a big why person. I lead a lot with why, with my recruiting team, with my leadership team, with my boss. And I think that's probably because I didn't always understand the why professionally. And that that's actually really kind of harmful when you don't you kind of have some self-doubt when you don't actually understand why you're getting moved or why something is happening. You think it's like, oh, did I do something bad or did I not do something right? Or and you take that inside. And it took me a little while to actually figure out and to finally get to the spot of advocating for myself and asking
Mm.
clarifying questions. And until I started doing that is when I actually was told, oh, no, no, you're doing everything right. That's why we're doing this. I'm like, oh, got it. I wish I would have asked this sooner.
Right.
So, yeah,
Well, that's pretty cool that you had that like point of impact within Microsoft because it sounds like sort of a startup point of impact to an extent, like just being problem solving and bouncing from one thing to another. It's kind of cool to see that that was a essentially kind of the parallels working for a smaller company working at Microsoft. I just wouldn't have assumed somebody would be taking on so many different points of impact one after another at a big company. That's pretty cool.
well, I doubt I'm alone. I'm sure a lot of people at large, you know, I think that's the thing. I went from Microsoft to Amazon,
Yeah.
and I do think that it's an interesting thing. Um, I do think that there's this misnomer about working in large companies that, you know, you can get kind of lost in the shuffle. I think
Hmm.
if you land on the right team, which is why you should always interview so specifically,
Hmm.
whether it's the department, the leader, man, ask those questions really, really carefully. Um, I think if you end up on the right team, you have some very cool opportunities, even within really large companies.
Sure.
Um, you end up on the wrong team, you have a really terrible, you potentially have a really terrible experience.
Yeah, but I guess you could say that like any size company, right? Like just being,
That's true.
yeah, like critical or thoughtful about like where to make a move, right?
Yeah.
And then like, so now you're at Axon, and it's it's a lot, I would say a lot smaller, right, than a Microsoft or an Amazon. How many employees does Axon have?
Right now, including well, we've just made a couple acquisitions, and so
Oh,
we
wow,
just
okay.
popped up, yeah, we just popped up north of about 6,000.
Oh, wow,
So when
okay, cool, nice.
I started 6 years ago, and we were barely 1,000. So pretty substantial
That's
amount of growth
yeah, that's a
in a
lot of
6 year
growth.
period of time.
That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. So now you're in like an SVP role overseeing talent acquisition and HR people ops, right?
HR
Okay.
ops,
HR
not,
ops, HR.
yeah,
Got
yeah.
it. Got it. Okay. And yeah, I wanted to talk to you about at this point in your career, lots of executive level experience in talent acquisition, uh, HR ops, people ops. I want to get a sense for maybe some of the top takeaways and lessons learned that you have. Um, so one of the concepts that you slowed down on with me is talking about being okay with not being liked. Uh, could you explain that a little bit to us and maybe why you feel like it's so important?
Yeah, I interview people leaders on this. I interview like managers on this. It's not. It's a little nuanced, and I would welcome your perspective on this, James, because I'm sure everybody has it. I think naturally people genuinely want to be potentially people pleasers, right? And when you're in roles of leadership, you're making million-dollar decisions. You're, you know, leading teams. You're manager of managers. You have to make the best decision that you possibly can, and then stick by it. And sometimes those are unpopular decisions. You can't worry that everyone on the team is happy with that decision or likes the outcome of that decision. And what I really kind of interview on and I vet people and I talk with the people leaders on is you need to care more that the team respects the decision making that you are working through and that you're articulating why you're making that decision because you care that they follow that decision whether that they like it or not. If they respect you, they're going to follow you. Doesn't matter if they like you. And there's a nuance there. And I think if you do your job right, you have built trust, you've built rapport, you can be likable, but you need to care and invest in the leadership, the trust, and the respect. And I think that's kind of like how I have really vectored in as I've gotten a little older in my career.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's ultimately to from a leadership perspective, like building trust within an organization if they see people see you operating in a consistent way over a period of time and uh, to some extent that becomes predictable to so people feel like okay like leadership's in control we have a clear path forward of what we're looking to accomplish right like that's those are the things that as you mentioned like getting people to follow you I feel
Yeah.
like is most important. They want to feel like there's a plan and there's like a consistent way, predictable way of that leader executing, even necessarily if they don't like everything about it, which they won't. There's still this level of like trust and stability and certainty. I would say like from like a almost like a feeling perspective, like if you
Mhm.
can if there's an environment in which they feel like they can trust and they have a level of certainty in terms of like the stability of the organization and leadership, then that ultimately they're probably going to value those things more in their life than how much they like necessarily just like as you put it like which feels like more superficial in a sense than somebody that you trust to kind of guide the direction of your career, right?
Yeah. The interesting thing that you just said there though is mm, don't overpromise and underdeliver too, right?
Hmm.
Because again, if you don't actually execute on what you say you're going to execute on, you're going to trust bust. There it's gone. And so I think that that was kind of embedded a little bit in what you just said, and that's not only with your business partners but also with your team.
Yeah,
And
for
so
sure.
you can't almost overcommit either. So you have to be pretty cleary eyed and really intentional. And then, man, you better do it. And if you don't do it, you're in trouble,
Right, right. Well, I feel like that's that should be the case for everybody, like
right?
across the
I
board within the
agree.
organization. Like one of the things
I
like
agree.
culturally that so I do at my companies is really focus on this concept of say-do ratio. Like
Mm,
we should have 100% say-do ratio. It's like basic stuff, but it's like those are the things, the behavioral traits that like make a successful team. So as we say we're going to do it, we're going to do it, right? This concept of
table stakes.
follow through, right? And then
Yeah.
communication, if there's like blockers, okay, we'll communicate it proactively, but never like
Yeah.
don't do something, right? Right. And then we find out after the fact. It's like I feel like that's super important. But yeah, I mean it's definitely a balance that it's hard to strike as a leader. It's one way that I kind of look at it is or when I think about like leadership and setting standards and expectations that people don't necessarily always love is like I have really, really high standards in my business and but I also have like, there's like a high level of empathy. Like I genuinely care about people, but like both have
Absolutely.
to exist. Like you like one thing that I actually learned this from like an executive coach pretty early on, but he said, if you have really high standards without like empathy, then you sort of just come across as an asshole. If
Oh,
you
for sure.
have if you have high levels of empathy but not high standards, you're just sort of a pushover. You're not a good leader. It's like kind of leading with both and I think, one thing we can do to like, particularly lead like when we're not necessarily liked in all regards is like you just genuinely do what you can help people. I mean, it has to work for the business and people have to earn it, and you have to set up a structure in which people have to, produce results in order to, you know, grow in the direction they want to grow in. But like, yeah, you're not gonna like it. Look, I'm still here for you. Like let's see, I'll
Yeah.
see what I can do as a leader. But like leading with it should never that desire to be liked as put it like people have should never impact the standards that we
Well,
put in place, right?
so interestingly, what you just also said in there with regards to expectations and empathy, I talk about that a lot with folks on the team of being direct but kind.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like there's no reason why people shouldn't know that, hey, your performance isn't going well right now. You don't have to be an asshole when you're delivering that. You can be very direct, you can have very crisp examples, and you can be really empathetic. Like, is there other things going on in your life right now that might be the reason why behind this? Like, do you want to have that conversation? I think inviting people to have a conversation versus making assumptions is also really, really, really business critical. That active listening part could not be more important, especially at this kind of stage in career.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's like just I try to remind myself as a leader that people will hang on every word that I say. And I'm just a human being too. So it's like it's okay to not like do things perfectly, but I do try to
Yeah.
like they may not like something, but I'm still gonna set an example of how they should try to be in their career, like who they should aspire to be. I'm gonna set guidance in terms of like values and behavior and communication that's gonna, you talked a lot about, and we'll get more into this, like setting people up for success. Because the reality is like when we're in these like positions of influence, people will ultimately, whether they like it or not, they're gonna learn things from us and they're gonna take
Yeah.
that behavior forward. Even if they, regardless
Whether
of
we
what
like
they
it or
think.
not.
Right. Like we have that impact. And so it's like it actually kind of I think actually goes into it's kind of a nice transition. Sometimes that just works out that way. You talked about like setting people up for success, and
hmm
you actually talked a little bit about like their next job interview. And can you kind of explain to us like this kind of second principle or second top takeaway, what how you think about setting people up for success?
Yeah. I think very much my job as a leader is to make sure that people have content for the next job interview. And so whether I'm doing skip levels, whether I'm in with, my leaders or people that are my direct reports, it's kind of interrogating like, are they having the right opportunities? Am I providing the right opportunities for them to have cool content for their next job interview? Are they working on, building our next tool launch? Are they getting to help us optimize a process? Are they helping us think about the next AI tool that we have coming in? I'm not. I cannot be the one doing every single thing here. And so if I'm not empowering and enabling the team to have those experiences,
Hmm.
I'm failing. And so I asked the team, like, do you like tell me about what you're going to interview on. And if somebody doesn't have a good answer, then I'm failing them. And I hold myself pretty accountable to that.
Yeah. I think also like I don't I think it's at least this is important for me as a leader is to be able to have transparent conversations with people about their
Yeah.
future and getting comfortable around the idea of talking about like, okay, do we have more alignment on our team moving forward, or
Yeah.
is like the path you want to go on different than what we can offer? And
Yeah.
if it is different, then let's like, one motion I actually did was like I asked I've asked a couple, like historically, I've asked people like, hey, like we'll put together an ideal job description of like what you want your role to be, and we can figure out how much of that you can do here. I mean, like there's been some cases where like I don't have the ultimate role that somebody wants to move into, but it's like I still want that JD. Like give it to me, like not what I can do for you at Secure Vision or June, like my companies, but just give me like let me know what your ideal role looks like. And okay, maybe there's 20% of it we could do. Well, maybe there's a class I can pay for. Maybe there's something
Yeah.
that we can like do to help with that, so that we can at least get you going in that direction. And I also think that those types of things that there are like truly benefits from a productivity perspective when you're making that investment in people to try to help them grow,
Absolutely. But do you know what you just did there? That it's wonderful and great and I love is that you encourage that human being to take the initiative to think about it for themselves and to come up with a plan. So often people look to other people to make the plan for them, or like, hey, I want to keep growing in my career, period. Insert
Yeah.
manager talking. And it's like, no, no, I actually like if anyone in my team does that, I'm like, great, what are your ideas? How would you like to grow? So I love
Right.
that you do that because it's really important for people to have like what do you feel you're good at? What do you want to grow in? Because I don't think that people think enough sometimes for them for about what they want to invest in, and they wait for other people to tell them, oh, you should do this project, or oh, let you should go and do that, versus I really want to take on building out benefits. I really want to take on building out, the new project associated with Zendesk, or
Hmm.
or et cetera. So
What's interesting is like I've really, in the past few years, I've really changed my perspective on how I think about people's professional development. I feel like when I was younger, I would have my ideas around where I think somebody should grow. Like I
yeah,
see this in this type of person. Like, and I will still like I share those things with people if I feel like, okay, I feel like you'd be really good at this or that. But I spend a lot more time listening to what they want versus like my vision of who they could become. And I really have stop trying to convince like I will share why I think a certain path would make sense for them, but I do listen a lot more and I don't try to like convince too much on people taking a certain direction because it's just never really worked out. Like if I've kind of pushed hard to convince somebody to go down a certain path because I see it as like, oh, you would crush it here, like you'd be so good at this, or you can do it, like I believe in you to do this. Like it just hasn't worked out for me. So it's like like what has worked out more is like, okay, look, if you don't love where you're at, or we don't have the exact path that you want, I'm not going to convince you to go down this other path. But look, what I'm going to do is I'll help you get to where you need to be, at least set you up for success. And at least in us, like I see more performance, like more productivity. I mean, just like from a pure
yeah,
business perspective, like trying to empower people and just kind of, you just got to let people kind of grow in whatever direction they want to ultimately go in. And I think we have to be, as leaders, also just sort of okay with it. Now, ideally, we do need team players that are willing to do whatever it takes. Like that's
sure.
different, right? But I really have taken a different approach where I just try to understand as much as I possibly can about how somebody wants to develop and grow. And then it's like, okay, like I have my ideas, but we'll just have to see what if they don't go for it, they don't go for it. We got to get somebody else for for this other job we're looking for, right? So
So out of curiosity, what made that change for you personally?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it was more personal growth. I mean, when I used to do that, I was still in my 20s, and maybe there was like this level of like, I don't think I would have characterized this at the time, but maybe there was a little bit of arrogance there where I feel like I sort of had it figured out. Um, but it wasn't just that. Like, I think some of it was genuinely like, I think you would crush it here. I think this is an opportunity for you to make more money, to do this, to do that. Like, you're going to be successful here. But again, that still is taking the perspective of like I know what's best for somebody else. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
it's just I don't know, maybe it's becoming a parent, just getting older, going through the ups and
Well,
downs in
you can
life,
also,
you
well,
know?
but you can also tell you care about people.
Yeah, yeah, you do. There's like it was both, right? But it's like I
Yeah.
cared about people, but it's also like it's like it's their lives, right? Like like you have to
Oh yeah,
be supportive, but like don't act like I can't know for sure. You know what I mean? So it's like it's just a different perspective in purely from a performance perspective. Like again, every time I tried to force it a little too much, it didn't work out as well. Like people weren't like as passionately engaged in what they were doing. They didn't feel comfortable. It didn't come naturally to them. Like so it was like just from the perspective of okay, I'm going to put it out there what I think this person can do, but then like they need to make the decision on the path that they're going to take, and I'm not going to try to like push too hard on that path for them. So I think it's a balancing act. I think we still have to help guide people, but let them ultimately like I try to remind myself like okay, they're in the driver's seat. I'm not going to push too hard because I might be able to convince them to do it, but are they going to do their best work?
oh, that's so true. You can always
You know
tell
what I
when
mean?
somebody is hating their job based on how
Yeah.
they're doing it, right?
Yeah, and there's just they just lose something. There's this level of engagement and interest that just starts to kind of fade. And then you
Yeah.
just don't have this team that's like this well-oiled machine that's moving really fast and people are engaged. And that's the, that's what I'm trying to what we're all trying to build in like these high
We're
growth
all trying to
environments,
build
right?
it. I know. And then
Yeah.
it's tricky, right? The high growth environment change is happening all of the time. Change is inevitable. Um, Adapting to that change is really challenging. And the team perpetually needing to adapt to that change and still have the camaraderie and that go get 'em, attitude. I feel like I'm watching that metamorphosis on our own squad right now, and that's a struggle, right? Like how do you continue to navigate ambiguity, rapid change, and feel like you're having an impact, still feel cohesive, run at the speed of light, do all the change management, add in all of these tools, and and feel like your work matters. That's a it's a tough space right now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I can't imagine for your team too, going from like 1 to 5,000. That's just like insane growth, right?
A
And growth
lot.
through like organic growth plus acquisition. Like that's a lot of moving pieces to oversee as a leader. So kudos to you. That's seems like
Well,
you definitely have your hands
I
full.
I have the best team. So
Yeah.
we've got a lot of we've done a lot of work. I have the best team.
Well, look, we also one of the top takeaways, and this is sort of what you said is almost like your obsession in 2026, is you
Mm.
talked about automation, and
Yep.
you also brought up a really interesting point, which I don't think is discussed enough. So I'm excited to have this conversation. There's a difference between AI and automation, and
Hmm.
it seems like those concepts are often conflated and maybe potentially misunderstood. And so, could you explain to us what you mean by this?
Yeah. I think in this moment, I think people actually string together AI and automation in the exact same phrase, or even sometimes conceptual, especially when they're thinking about recruiting or systems or tools. And the reality is you do have to inherently separate them, right? Like the intent of automation is to drive efficiency in your processes, and then AI should be removing that friction and really, really helping, almost the grease and the wheels of that process. The problem is if you're not really vectored in and focused on having really clean processes or as efficient processes, whether that's through automation, whether that's through your human beings, and you slap in AI, you've actually just made a chaotic, messy process that wasn't efficient
Like
actually
chaos
worse.
at scale. You just
Yeah,
basically created a
yeah,
bigger problem. Yeah.
yeah. And so I really like we have been using AI in our recruiting, function since 2023. We've been kind of like, into this space. We've been having all of these conversations, and I like to think they're right conversations. We've made some mistakes. We've licked our battle wounds, if you will. I've owned it with my own team of when I've gotten it wrong. Um, and it's really important to make sure that you've got the right processes that you're vectored in on, and you're not just, gleaning onto that shiny sexy AI tool. And there's a lot out there. Like there's a lot out there. You just have to kind of like read through what's the right thing for you. But I think there's a lot of pressure on talent acquisition leaders right now, to drive AI and automation in their processes. I think there's a lot of pressure on talent acquisition leaders to use these tools to reduce headcount. And I think there's that balance of, hey, make sure when you are looking at those, if it's a tool or if it's even a process, understand your return on investment. And so being able to say, hey, what, whether it's a people cost, whether it's a dollar cost, whether it's a time cost, what is either the company going to get for that, or what's the negative impact associated with that? Because there is a negative associated impact with launching a tool, that honestly I think we underestimate too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like part of it is we were kind of discussing the resistance to change sometimes.
Mhm.
When folks are used to running a process a very similar way for a long period of time. We had kind of discussed like maybe why this is, like particularly for recruiting teams, it's kind of interesting. Like people are talking about kind of resistance that candidates will have and candidate experience, but we were talking about the use case for AI interviewing, and a lot of
Yeah,
the feedback from candidates is actually quite positive on a lot of
it
these
is.
tools.
Yeah.
The resistance at first seems to come more from recruiters than it does from candidates, interestingly enough.
Yeah, we launched an AI interviewer module back in February on about 18 jobs, and I was sharing our candidate satisfaction score was about 4.3 out of 5. Definitely some folks that like, hey, I'd prefer to be chatting with a human being, and you never ever going to make everybody happy. Our recruiters, it was a slow adoption. Like, oh, I can't put it on this role, I can't put it on that role. In candor, like we've just got a lot of really critical roles open right now. And so my job is also to find and create capacity in the resources I have. And so I went through all of our open roles and really did a deep dive analysis of our HRIS job codes and like, well, these are the 31 job codes that we're going to turn on the AI interviewer for. And team, sorry, but we're not going to have a choice here. Like, we got to go. I got to find hours, and this is how we're going to do it. And so I kind of removed that friction in the choice. Um, Obviously with a little bit of data along the way of like, hey,
Sure. Yeah.
here's kind of like what the candidates are telling us. Here's why we're doing this. And here's the hours that we're going to give back to you guys so that we can go and help our business continue to grow. Please do this with me, not against me. So I think if you can lead your teams with, again, a little bit of that data, explain that why, it makes it a little less scary. I think
Yeah.
recruiters inherently think you're replacing my job. And if you help explain, like, no, I'm replacing the 10 screens that you're going to do on repeat for a security guard over and over and over, when maybe that security guard worked until 10 p.m. last night and they want to like do their recorded interview at 11 p.m. because they're like wired and they're ready to go and not wake up at 8 a.m. and like talk to you. So I don't know, you kind of have to sometimes also meet the candidate where they're at. And I think we just need to continue to adopt.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had a pretty overwhelming like positive feedback from candidates. Like, so one of the companies I run, I was telling you, is called June, and there's several product tiers. We have a sourcing database, essentially like fully evaluated talent for primarily tech companies. But the first tier is the AI interviewer, and
Yeah,
we took a business strategy of offering tier one as like the free tier. So we're able
smart.
to roll it out to a lot of companies very, very quickly and collect a lot of data very, very quickly. And our ultimate product play is a lot more holistic beyond the AI interviewer. But again, it's like pretty consistently across the board for like GTM for technical roles, and like everything in between. Like even like, like a lot of people kind of, I think, sort of assumed like, okay, this is only going to be for sort of like specific types of roles, right? But like the reality is like across the board, we're getting like pretty high engagement rates, pretty high feedback rating from candidates. And I think it's like once the recruiters see like, oh wait, this is actually awesome because now I just have this like really awesome short list versus
Yeah,
going through like because some of the customers like they're getting like 1,000 plus inbounds like for one job, and candidates are so used to not being able to engage at all, or like
yeah,
they're not getting any type of feedback, right? So I think candidates are just a lot of them are just actually kind of grateful to be able to get into the process a lot faster and know that their information is actually going to be viewed because it's going to be part of like potentially a short list if they know they're qualified versus just being one out of 1,000 people. Because I feel like it's like would be really frustrating to like know you're qualified for a job, but just know also like somebody may not even just see my application. Like I know I'm
yeah.
qualified for this, but they may not even see it, right? Um,
You know, I have a lot of empathy for just the market and candidates. You hear all the time like it's a black box, right? Like I submit my application, I put my resume in, and it's a black box. I have no idea what happens, right? I hear that a lot. I mean, obviously, like we interview for a living, and so it is really fascinating when I'm interviewing candidates. Like, there's a lot of gratitude. Like, hey, thanks, thank you for like interviewing me today. Like, I've when people are actively looking for jobs, it's sometimes a very stressful time in their career. So it's not just empathy, obviously, with your team. It's also empathy for that candidate experience.
sure, for sure, yeah.
There's a lot tied up in a human being, whether they're changing a job, they're a passive candidate, or they're looking for a job. Like, as a recruiter, like we have a really unique role with a human and helping navigate like the right kind of personal and even sometimes like family decision for them.
Yeah,
Um,
it's huge.
it's really it's a fun opportunity.
It is for sure. I think it's like the thing we have to remind ourselves as a recruiter, particularly for fast-paced companies, particularly within tech. It's like it's an insanely competitive industry, arguably
Yeah,
the most competitive industry in the world. You got to be on it. You got to be very metrics and systems driven. You have to be so consistent with your output. You can't skip a beat or take your eye off the ball for a second. And that's how it feels, right? Um,
yeah,
but it's like remembering we're in a people business and truly like somebody their career is like the most it's one of the most like vulnerable kind of scary things decisions to be making, and yes it is a big decision for a company, but the reality is like
bigger for that
it's more
person.
risk, like at the end of the day like it's risky for us to hire the wrong people. It can be a 7 8 figure mistake, but like at the same time it's riskier for the person making the move.
Yeah,
Like, and we just have to try to like remember it's hard. It's really hard, like to do all of those things, right? Like to maintain the candidate experience piece. But it's also it's just so critically important. It's like tech feels like a big industry, but it's also like a small industry at the same time. Like, it will
yeah,
get back around, like people's experiences and that type of thing.
no, it's true.
Yeah. Well, look, I also wanted to talk to you about really about like your future, right? And
Mhm.
talking about like professionally, holistically, as a person. One common theme of this conversation is you talk a lot about like being an architect.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like when you think about your future and growing professionally, like tell us more about that and like more about like what being an architect really means to you and how you want to continue to develop in that direction.
It's fun, right? Because I don't ever think the job is done ever. And I know that that sounds like it may sound like I'm not satisfied. So it's not that I don't want to celebrate wins and things like that, but I always look back and think that well, we could have done it better. We could have iterated on that. So I'm always tinkering. I'm always like breaking processes down and thinking on how you can build it better, how you
Mm,
can do it better, how you can up it, what's it going to look like the next time. So I obviously do that professionally and do that personally as well. So I think for me in the this next phase of my career, I have an incredible leader right now who trusts and empowers me to do that not just in talent acquisition but in other facets of HR.
sure.
Um, and so she's enabled me to kind of get my arms around the employee experience. And we're tinkering. How are we do that better? I talk about with the team, like, what do we eat next? And so when I think about architecting, I think the sky's the limit. I think it's not being afraid to make mistakes. And so for me, when I personally think about, that where do I go from here? Sky's the limit, right? I think I tease my boss that I don't want her job. She's our fearless leader. She's our CHRO, but I wouldn't mind having her seat, at a smaller size company somewhere else at another moment in time to continue to build, the holistic employee experience. I think that's a cool thing to think about. My husband and I have side hustles on the side. We've got a property management company where always kind of like looking to invest in real estate and short-term rentals, and it's fun to kind of have your brain exercise your brain in very different ways. He's a wealth manager, and so his big thing is how are we going to replace our current income when we no longer are working so that we can stop
Mm,
working, and be able to have an awesome lifestyle and continue to have a lot of fun with our kids in our later life. And so I've learned a lot from him on how to plan for the future. So yeah, I mean the next kind of like chapter for me is iteration, continuing to be really open minded and paying attention to the continuing changes in the talent landscape. Technology is changing this space so rapidly. You cannot take your eye off of that right now. And so I'm very, very focused on that because I think it's changing recruiting and HR just right in front of my eyes. And if I'm not
Yeah.
paying attention to that, I'm going to be a dinosaur. So I'm literally paying attention to the next 6 months,
Yeah.
if I'm honest, James.
Yeah, for sure. And I know what you said, like you also had mentioned like one of the top takeaways you have at this point in your life, and I'm assuming it's gonna like be really important to you moving forward is like continuing to be your authentic self.
Yeah.
The quote, continue to be your authentic self because no one will do it for you. Is there any like advice you could give people out there on that? Like how does that what does that really look like? And um yeah, just why it's so important.
Um, Only you have your voice. No one else is going to have your perspective. No one else is going to have lived your life. No one else is going to have your opinion. And if we do our, especially in career settings, if we do our jobs right, we have formed teams with perspectives and opinions that can respectfully share them and push back on one another. That's when you, especially in tech, when you're making products, like everything status quo, you want to be able to have dialogue and be able to have discourse. Being your authentic self means sometimes you have a differing opinion and you just land it respectfully with the other party. That doesn't mean that you get your way all the time. Sometimes, again, they like disagree and commit. But I never want to be like the yep, I'm just going to go along with it and not say my opinion in a room where everyone's nodding their head. If I really feel that I have something to share, I'm going to share it. And I think the advice that I would give to people is like it doesn't have you don't have to be that loud person in the room that's always objecting to things. Like kind of pick and choose your battles, if you will. But at the same time, like if you feel really passionate about something and I don't know, don't be that sheep. Don't be that person that just nods your head. I really have valued how I've curated my personal voice over the years, and I don't think I'm not the loudest in the room. I don't come in banging on doors. I really try to kind of seek to understand other people's perspectives before I share my own. And honestly, that's grown my perspective because I do it in that way. But being true to yourself could not be more important because literally if you don't share kind of like a little bit of that sense of who you are and it comes full circle to leadership, people aren't going to follow a fake person. They're going to follow, that person that they feel is being genuine and authentic. And if you're trying to emulate someone else, you're trying to pretend to be another leader, you're trying to, okay, well, my boss is acting this way, so I'm going to act this way. You're gonna have less trust, and so that's also kind of like tied in there of why I try really hard just to be myself.
Yeah, it's a trust thing.
Yeah,
Like, and maybe some leaders can't handle that. I can't handle getting like the direct communication from their team, but those aren't necessarily the people you ultimately want to be around in your career if you can help it. Um,
yeah,
I think like the trust aspect of being able to speak up and speak your opinion, whether somebody agrees or not, it's like okay, they know they can rely on you to be an objective like person that's going to bring up alternatives or risks or whatever else, right? So I think it's important in terms of like it's really really important in terms of peers on the executive team, and it's also really important for like employees and folks that report up into us, right? Like,
authenticity.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
exactly, yeah, yeah. Well, that's really good advice. Well, Gabrielle, this has been a really fun conversation. I've really enjoyed talking with you today.
Thanks for
Thank you
having me.
for coming on the show and sharing all your story and your advice with everyone. It's been a really fun episode. I'm glad we could do this.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing the next couple episodes you're doing. You're doing a really cool thing, having some really great speakers. So it's been fun to follow you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.